action in college admissions. In a 6-3 decision, the court said that Harvard University and the University of North Carolina's admissions programs that take race into account violate the Constitution. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said, quote, "The Harvard and UNC admissions programs cannot be reconciled with the guarantees of the Equal Protection Clause. Both programs lack sufficiently focused and measurable objectives, warranting the use of race, unavoidably employ race in a negative manner, involve racial stereotyping, and lack meaningful endpoints." In her dissent, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman on the nation's highest court, wrote, and we quote, "With let them eat cake obliviousness, today the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life." In the past 20 years, the Supreme Court had twice upheld affirmative action in programs in college admissions, including as recently as 2019. You see the president walking into the Roosevelt Room now. Let us go now live to President Biden and his reaction to the Supreme Court ruling.
45 years, the United States Supreme Court has recognized the college's freedom to decide how to build diverse student bodies and to meet their responsibility of opening doors of opportunity for every single American. In case after case, including recently, just as a few years ago in 2016, the court has affirmed and reaffirmed this view, that colleges could use race not as a determinative factor for admission, but as one of the factors among many in deciding who to admit from a already qualified pool of applicants. Today, the court once again walked away from decades of precedent and as the dissent has made clear. The dissent states in today's decision, quote, "rolls back decades of precedent and momentous progress," end of quote. I agree with that statement from the dissent. The court has effectively ended affirmative action in college admissions, and I strongly disagree with the court's decision. Because affirmative action is so misunderstood, I want to be clear, make sure everybody's clear about what the law has been and what it has not been until today. Many people wrongly believe that affirmative action allows unqualified students to be admitted ahead of qualified students. This is not how college admissions work. Rather, colleges set out standards for admission, and every student has to meet those standards. Then and only then, after first meeting the qualifications required by the school, do colleges look at other factors in addition to their grades, such as race. The way it works in practice is this. Colleges first establish a qualified pool of candidates based on meeting certain grade, test scores, and other criteria. Then and only then, it is from this pool of applicants, all of whom have already met the school standards, that the class is chosen after weighing a wide range of factors, among them being race. You know, I've always believed that one of the greatest strengths of America, you're tired of hearing me say it, is our diversity. But I believe that. If you have any doubt about this, just look at the United States military. The finest fighting force in the history of the world. It's been a model of diversity. And has not only made our nation better, stronger, but safer. I believe the same is true for our schools. I've always believed that the promise of America is big enough for everyone to succeed, and that every generation of Americans, we have benefited by opening the doors of opportunity just a little bit wider to include those who've been left behind. I believe our colleges are stronger when they're racially diverse. Our nation is stronger because we are tapping into the full range of talent in this nation. I also believe that while talent, creativity, and hard work are everywhere across this country, not equal opportunity. It is not everywhere across this country. We cannot let this decision be the last word. I want to emphasize, we cannot let this decision be the last word. While the court can render a decision, it cannot change what America stands for. America is an idea unique in the world, an idea of hope and opportunity, of possibilities, of giving everyone a fair shot, of leaving no one behind. We've never fully lived up to it, but we've never walked away from it either. We will not walk away from it now. We should never allow the country to walk away from the dream upon which it was founded. That opportunity is for everyone, not just a few. We need a new path forward, a path consistent with the law that protects diversity and expands opportunity. So today I want to offer some guidance to our nation's colleges as they review their admission systems after today's decision. Guidance that is consistent with today's decision. They should not abandon, let me say this again, they should not abandon their commitment to ensure student bodies of diverse backgrounds and experience that reflect all of America. What I propose for consideration is a new standard, where colleges take into account the adversity a student has overcome when selecting among qualified applicants. Let's be clear, under this new standard, just as was true under the earlier standard, students first have to be qualified applicants. They need the GPA and test scores to meet the school's standards. Once that test is met, then adversity should be considered, including students' lack of financial means, because we know too few students of low-income families, whether in big cities or rural communities, are getting an opportunity to go to college. When a poor kid, maybe the first in their family to go to college, gets the same grades and test scores as a wealthy kid, whose whole family's gone to the most elite colleges in the country and whose path has been a lot easier. Well, the kid who faced tougher challenges has demonstrated more grit, more determination, and that should be a factor that colleges should take into account in admissions, and many still do. It also means examining where the student grew up and went to high school. It means understanding the particular hardships that each individual student has faced in life, including racial discrimination that individuals have faced in their own lives. The court says, quote, nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an application's discussion of how race has affected his or her life, but be it through discrimination or inspiration or otherwise, end of quote. Because the truth is, we all know it, discrimination still exists in America. Discrimination still exists in America. Discrimination still exists in America. Today's decision does not change that. It's a simple fact. If a student had to overcome adversity on their path to education, the college should recognize and value that. Our nation's colleges and universities should be engines of expanding opportunity through upward mobility. But today, too often, that's not the case. The statistics, one statistic, students from the top 1% of family incomes in America are 77 times more likely to get into elite college than one from the bottom 20% of family incomes. 77% greater opportunity. Today, for too many schools, the only people who benefit from the system are the wealthy and the well-connected. The odds have been stacked against working people for much too long. We need a higher education system that works for everyone, from Appalachia to Atlanta and to far beyond. We can and must do better, and we will. Today, I'm directing the Department of Education to analyze what practices help build a more inclusive and diverse student bodies and what practices hold that back. Practices like legacy admissions and other systems expand privilege instead of opportunity. Colleges and universities should continue their commitment to support, retain, and graduate diverse students and classes. You know, and companies who are already realizing the value of diversity should not use this decision as an excuse to turn away from diversity either. We can't go backwards. You know, I know today's court decision is a severe disappointment to so many people, including me. But we cannot let the decision be a permanent setback for the country. We need to keep an open door of opportunities. We need to remember that diversity is our strength. We have to find a way forward. We need to remember that the promise of America is big enough for everyone to succeed. You know, that's the work of my administration, and I'm always going to fight for that. And I want to thank you all. And I know you've been told I have a helicopter out there waiting to go up to do an interview in New York. I'll be talking more about this, a live interview. But thank you very much, and we're going to have plenty of time to talk about this. But we're not going to let this break us. Thank you.
President Biden, the Congressional Black Caucus said the Supreme Court has thrown into question its own legitimacy. Is this a rogue court?
This is not a normal court.
Should there be term limits for the justices, sir?
As President Biden left the Roosevelt room, he took one question: is this a rogue court? The president said it is not a normal court. Let us go to senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who joins us from the North Lawn of the White House. Ed, the president said the Supreme Court has, and these are the president's words, effectively ended affirmative action in college admissions. He said the court cannot have the last word, and there has to be a new path forward. Then he said there should be guidance. He provided that guidance. Please summarize and tell us what that tells us about how prepared this White House was for this decision.
Yeah, they're in a series of cases they've been waiting for this session. One of them that's been reviewed and for which scenarios were prepared is this one. And you heard him say there should be a new standard regarding adversity a student has overcome, and then some other general guidelines. That is actually consistent with what the court was writing today, saying that it can be considered alongside things like adversity and whatnot. The president is speaking to a country in which a majority believe affirmative action programs should be continued, should be allowed to continue. But on the specific issue of race-based college admissions, just 30% of Americans believe they should be allowed. And so you heard the president there try to clarify what exactly Harvard and the University of North Carolina were up to and how going forward, potentially, race could continue to be a factor. But that signal that he's asking the Education Department to look into this, in plainer English, is I'm looking for some kind of executive action or clarification I can give to the nation's institutes of higher learning going forward in the wake of this decision.
Ed, before I go to Nicole Killian, who's here at the desk with me, after the Dobbs decision last year, there were some in the Democratic Party who thought the White House was slow-footed in its response, did have a comprehensive way to talk about this and respond. Do you detect in this reaction from the president today and some of the specifics you just outlined better preparation?
I do, because they've been channeling for the last several weeks that on this case and on the forthcoming decision regarding the student loan forgiveness program, a handful of others, that they have been anticipating potential scenarios and have been preparing potential options for the president. They don't want to talk about them publicly. But there's also been a broader preparation in the political space. And if we can, Major, we should call out some pretty rare and unique comments today from the former First Lady, Michelle Obama. You may have seen this earlier, but she gave a pretty long statement recalling her own personal experience as a student at Princeton and Harvard Law. And in part, she bemoans the fact that, quote, so often we just accept that money, power, and privilege are perfectly justifiable forms of affirmative action, while kids growing up, like I did, are expected to compete when the ground is anything but level. So today my heart breaks for any young person out there who's wondering what their future holds and what kinds of chances will be open to them. And while I know the strength and grit that lies inside kids who've always had to sweat a little more to climb the same ladders, I hope and I pray that the rest of us are willing to sweat a little too. She's also knocking the fact that legacy, whether your parents give to that university, have been a leg up for many people, but there's never been a legal challenge to that. And we should point out, both the president just now and Justice Neil Gorsuch, in a concurring opinion, suggested that that acceptance of legacy, or whether your parents are giving big money to university, should be reconsidered and perhaps done away with. It is a factor at Harvard University as well, which of course was the subject of today's legal challenge.
And many institutions around our country. I want to bring in Congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. Lots of reaction on Capitol Hill, though Congress is not in session in preparation for the long Independence weekend that approaches. Some of the reaction that's most notable to you, Nicole?
Well, certainly a lot of the reaction has fallen on party lines. Of course, you have a lot of Democrats who are criticizing this decision. Many Republicans, though, supporting it, saying that this is a welcome step. For instance, take Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who says now students will be able to compete based on equal standards and individual merit. This will make the college admissions process fairer and uphold equality under the law. We heard similar sentiment from Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said that the Supreme Court decision is a long overdue step. That being said, though, again, when you look at what Democrats have said, for instance, Leader Hakeem Jeffries, the first black minority leader in the House, he said that the court has turned a blind eye to systemic racism, which I think is a point that you heard President Biden make, and one that stuck to me. The discrimination still exists in America, and I think that is the debate and the argument argument that we saw from the justices today as well, where you have Chief Justice John Roberts arguing eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it, but yet you have someone like Ketanji Brown Jackson in the dissent saying deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. When you have health disparities, when you still have a racial wealth gap, when you still have housing discrimination. So, are we really equal? I think, when we look in terms of where we are as a society, there's so much of an argument about, are we in a post-racial society? And here you have some Democrats saying, no, that discrimination still exists. That's why these policies should still stand, which is why the president is proposing additional action.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. Joining us now is our CBS News legal contributor, Jessica Levinson. Jessica, in the basic, most fundamental sense, what is the legal orientation of the majority in reaching this conclusion, this historic conclusion?
The majority is saying that affirmative action programs are largely racial discrimination, and that the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause does not allow colleges and universities to do what they've been doing since 1978, which is consider race as a separate standalone factor. And as we heard, now it's going to be up to colleges and universities to try and figure out how to get a racially diverse student body while considering other factors and or how race affects an applicant's experience, but not as a separate factor.
Jessica Levinson, thank you so very much. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Good day.
Welcome back to CBS News. I'm Lana Zak.
And I'm Errol Barnett. You've been watching CBS News Special Report on the Supreme Court ruling to severely limit the use of affirmative action in higher education.
The president addressed today's ruling, saying that he strongly disagreed with the High Court's decision.
Today, the court once again walked away from decades of precedent and as the dissent has made clear. The dissent states in today's decision, quote, rolls back decades of precedent and momentous progress, end of quote. I agree with that statement from the dissents.
Evan Kameniker joins us now. He's a professor and former dean emeritus at the University of Michigan Law School. Evan, what legal recourse, if any, do colleges and universities have left to challenge today's ruling?
Wait for changes on the court, frankly. I mean, this court has definitively announced that this is their interpretation of the Equal Protection Clause and their interpretation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Presumably, somebody could say, well, let's try and convince Congress to change the statute that at least applies to private universities. But it is highly doubtful that our partisan gridlocked Congress today would respond to that kind of plea. So universities are basically going to have to just do their best to try and figure out how to go forward under this ruling. And unfortunately, I agree with the prediction of the dissent that this is going to have a significant dampening on the number of racial minority students who are admitted to this nation's more selective universities, both public and private.
Evan, it was interesting to hear the president say, we cannot allow this decision to be the last word. That was a quote from him in that press conference he gave. And then he provided guidance that he said was consistent with what the justices decided, and said that adversity, and in particular people's racial backgrounds as part of their character, should still be considered. Do you think, given what you were just saying about the significant dampening effect that eliminating affirmative action has had in other test cases, in essence, that universities will still be able to fulfill that promise of trying to bring together a diverse campus when following what the president is now saying is the new guidance?
Well, experience shows that will be very difficult. Here in Michigan, where I am, in California, at the flagship schools there, when state law prohibited affirmative action, universities did shift to race-neutral alternatives, spent a lot of time and energy and money trying to increase outreach efforts, provide more financial aid to make it more possible for students of low income to attend college, and yes, take into account holistically statements and letters of recommendation and personal essays that would speak to the kinds of adversity students have faced and why their accomplishments ought to be read in that light. Nonetheless, there was still a significant decrease in racial minority enrollment at all of the flagship schools in these states. And even today, particularly with respect to Black students, the number of enrolled students, for example, at the University of Michigan is substantially lower than it was before affirmative action was ended. So I agree with the president that this is certainly something that universities should do. Frankly, I think all universities already do it, but it's not going to be something that replaces the success of race-conscious admissions in terms of getting racial diversity into the classroom.
What did Justice Clarence Thomas argue in this decision?
Well, he has a number of arguments. He has always been one to say that he's concerned that race consciousness admissions actually, in some sense, stigmatizes or stereotypes the students that it is intended to benefit. I find that a bit puzzling. It really, in my experience, at both UCLA when they ended affirmative action and here in Michigan when they ended affirmative action, is students haven't been stereotyped or stigmatized because of affirmative action. Part of the stigma might be associated with just background societal discrimination that they would have experienced with or without affirmative action. And one of the difficulties is when you attend a school and you're the only Black person or Hispanic person in your class, other students might wrongly think anything you say is a reflection of what the so-called Black view or Hispanic view is on a particular topic. The reality is you need to have a larger number of minorities in the classroom that will reveal, in fact, Black students don't think alike. Minority students don't think alike. That's what helps break down racial stereotypes in our society. That's been one of the great success stories of getting more racial diversity in the classroom. And I'm worried that that progress will be stunted by today's ruling.
It's a really interesting point. No one group is monolithic, and a diversity of a student body helps prove that. There's much intellectual and religious and political diversity among groups as well. Thank you very much, Evan, for your insight on this major decision. We also now want to bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, what struck me about the president's remarks moments ago was that when he was asked if this was a rogue court based on this decision, he paused for a moment there before saying it is not a normal court. What jumped out to you from what the president just said?
That he said anything in that regard, frankly, about the makeup of the court, because he is someone who is the former chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, has been an institutionalist and defender of the court, even though he, of course, authorized a study that was sort of pushed for by the liberal wing of his party that, of course, has been so concerned about the makeup of the court and the ideological shift that we've witnessed over the last several years. So we'll see if he has anything more to say about that later today or in the coming days, as undoubtedly there will be renewed partisan pressure on him and on Congress to try to do something to hold the court more accountable or to reconsider its functions. A few things I want to convey to you regarding what's been going on here at the White House in anticipation of this. We made this point during the special report, Major Garrett did, that last year around this time when the abortion rights decision came down, the White House was criticized for appearing to be flat-footed and caught off guard by the court's decision. In this case, and in the forthcoming decision regarding student loan forgiveness, the White House has been anticipating and preparing for months. We just got handed some information regarding what the White House has been doing, and I'm going to sort of skim it here as I read it to you. But basically, AID's telling us that for months, the White House has been meeting with civil rights organizations, universities, and legal organizations to prepare for this potential decision. And the White House, along with several of its other offices and the Justice Department, have been working together on an executive directive, essentially, that has come forward from the White House today. Throughout the process, they say the president was clear with his team that diversity was one of America's great strengths, that we needed to make sure that this decision wouldn't be a permanent step back for the country, and we would need a way forward to protect diversity and opportunity for everybody in America. So one thing to consider here is that they have just sort of laid out in a little more detail what the president was talking about when he said that the Education Department is going to be providing guidance to universities on how exactly to move forward from this. They say that going forward, the president, at least, is calling on colleges and universities to, when considering applicants to their institutions, give serious consideration to the adversities students have overcome, including the financial means of a student or their family, where a student grew up and went to high school, and personal experiences of hardship or discrimination, including racial discrimination, that a student may have faced. Why that's interesting, at least to this reporter, is because in the ruling by the court earlier today, Chief Justice Roberts wrote that nothing prohibits universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected the applicant's life, so long as that discussion is concretely tied to a quality of character or unique ability that the particular applicant can contribute to the university. Many universities have for too long wrongly concluded that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. This nation's constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. So in at least this reporter's read of things, what the White House is saying is essentially what the court is saying, which is consider a more holistic experience of the student. Yes, what race they are, but where they grew up. What was the quality of the high school? Did they overcome some kind of disability or family issue or economic hardship to get to the point where they could apply? And that, in essence, what the White House is proposing is, perhaps coincidentally, if not at least good thinking ahead work here by somebody in the administration, to say consistent with what the court is calling on universities to do going forward. So, you know, it's going to be a ruling that disappoints a lot of people in this country and is going to be perhaps scary and shocking to those that are beginning the application process this fall, thinking that maybe perhaps they were going to be the beneficiaries of some of the existing policies. But both the court and the White House now saying take a more holistic approach going forward and still account for diversity, just in different ways.
All right, Ed, really appreciate all of your insights. They have been so sharp since the very beginning of this news coming down. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed.
Now, for more on this ruling, we're joined by Democratic Representative Stephen Horsford of Nevada. He is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Congressman, just give us your initial thoughts on this ruling and what our senior White House correspondent just said, that this still leaves open the avenue for universities to consider a student's demographic in their totality as part of their experience, despite this decision.
Well, first, let me say I truly condemn the decision by the majority conservative members of the U.S. Supreme Court. They have rolled back 45 years of precedent in taking race-conscious preference into consideration as one of many factors in accepting a student for admission. I support the dissent by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor. I believe that we have to win in these upcoming elections to make their minority dissent the majority opinion in the future. We need to look at reforms to the Supreme Court because the legitimacy of this court has been called into question. The very fact that several of the justices were appointed, despite the fact that President Obama was not offered his nominee, Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump did everything they could to stack this court. And since that time, they have rolled back rights now on affirmative action, previously for women, and we're continuing to be concerned about voting rights and student loan forgiveness as well. But this decision, make no mistake about it, is going to make it harder for Black students and students of color to be considered for admission in public and private institutions. And my question to the court is, why did they exempt military academies in their decision today? Why is it okay to use race for military academies, but not to do so for public universities and private universities?
Congressman, I want to follow up on your point about wanting to pursue reforms to this court. One of the things that the president was asked about in his press conference was about whether he considered this a rogue court. And Errol and I were discussing that very pregnant pause that the president had and then answered not fully in agreement, but not fully in disagreement either. When you're talking about trying to pursue reforms, what is the Congressional Black Caucus intending to do? Are you talking about adding members to the Supreme Court? Is that something that's going to come back into the agenda?
Well, I believe the Congressional Black Caucus believes that we need to create equity and opportunity for everyone. We believe that if we're going to repeal affirmative action based on race, then we should repeal affirmative action based on legacy programs and privilege. We should review the ability to make admissions based on other criteria. Why are they singling out race, even though we know the history and the stain of race in America?
All
from
very
slavery.
important points, Congressman. But in particular, I just wanted to ask you for clarification more about what you had said about reforms to the court, what Congress intends to do when it comes to reforms to the Supreme Court.
Well, first and foremost, it's the very legitimacy of several of the justices who don't even deserve to be on the court today. And we believe that Senate Majority Leader Schumer and the Senate should absolutely take up measures to look at reform and accountability of the Supreme Court. Why? Because the fundamental decisions that they are making affect the constituents that we represent, the very existence and our ability to receive an education. Let's talk about why there is inequity in education to begin with. The fact that we have underfunded schools, lack of certified teachers, funding that's based on property tax models that we know are inequitable. This is why there's inherent inequities, and it's endorsed by federal law and institutions. And the Congressional Black Caucus will work hard to make reforms in every area possible.
And Congressman, you know, the expectation is that this will have a chilling effect for many of the high school students and the teenagers out there right now who are considering options for their future. What do you say to, you know, young people of color who see this decision and now may not apply to their favorite or most prestigious colleges and universities because despite having the grades and the experience, maybe they don't have the money or the family support to get there? What do you say to young people who see this decision and think that that college may not be for them?
Well, I want to be absolutely clear to young people. This decision does not in any way affect your ability to apply and to pursue your purpose in receiving the quality education that you are entitled. And as members of Congress, as the Congressional Black Caucus, working with colleagues in the Congressional Hispanic and Asian Caucus, we will do everything we can to ensure that you have equal access and consideration. We will work with public universities and private institutions, particularly HBCUs, to make sure those opportunities for education are available to you. We know that this law, affirmative action, has always been the floor. It is not the ceiling, and your excellence, your academic excellence, will not be determined by this ill-conceived Supreme Court decision. We will do everything we can to make sure that your right for a free and equitable education continues to be made available.
All right, and we're just showing some of our recent CBS News polling on this issue. Congressman Stephen Horsford, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, we appreciate you joining us today on this major news development. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
At this point, we're just going to take a very short break.
We will continue our coverage after the break, so stay with us. You're streaming CBS News.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship
with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bringing virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel. Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News. An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Now one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to CBS News. I'm Lana Zach.
And I'm Errol Barnett. As you know, we've been following the Supreme Court's ruling to severely limit the use of affirmative action in higher education.
The president addressed today's ruling, saying that he strongly disagreed with the high court's decision and provided guidance, he said, consistent with the decision in a way that would allow universities and colleges not to abandon their commitment to diversity.
Yeah, but the big question is, how will this ruling affect the real world and young people and students? So Robert Costa and Nicole Killian join us now. Robert is CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent. Nicole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Welcome to you both. Bob, let's begin with you. What are the Republican presidential candidates saying about this landmark Supreme Court decision?
Good to be with you both. The Republican presidential field is reacting in a very predictable way because the Republican Party for decades now has been trying to overhaul the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court, and especially during the Trump era, they were able to nominate and install justices who were moving in this direction on the issue of affirmative action, and now they have achieved with this decision their policy goal. And this is not just on this front, but on so many other fronts, from abortion to federal regulations. The conservatives feel like they are now on the march. And so you are seeing in the statements from Republican presidential candidates an echoing of the decision and a belief that the court, with this 6-3 move and a 6-3 conservative majority in many of these major cases, is moving in a direction they have long prepared the court to move in.
Nicole, we were just speaking with the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and he said that this points to all of the problems that go beyond just college admissions decisions, but about equity in our society. And one of the points that it continues to come up is how we're talking about higher education, but that there is a problem in primary education, that there is a difference in how our students are treated. And a lot of times that falls under race and socioeconomic status. What are you hearing from Congress members about trying to address some of those other issues that all contribute to this problem?
Well, I think you also heard Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries echo that in his statement and reaction, saying that the court has turned a blind eye towards systemic racism. I thought it was interesting when you asked the chair kind of what reforms the Congressional Black Caucus was interested in working on. He spoke kind of more broadly, saying, well, I think Leader Schumer should look at, reforms to the Supreme Court. We know, obviously, they are considering legislation to, for instance, review ethics tax reform, that is something that is under consideration. But, how do you codify affirmative action protections into law? I think that is the bigger question, certainly for those who are criticizing this decision. I would point, though, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressman Hank Johnson of Georgia, put out a pretty scathing statement, but he is one of several lawmakers who has proposed expanding the court from 9 members to 13. That is something that's certainly more progressive support. It hasn't really gained traction in Congress, but I would imagine in light of this decision, we could hear more calls, particularly among Democrats, for that. I mean, in terms of Republicans, similar to what Bob said, we have seen a number of congressional Republicans come out on this issue as well, saying that this is a welcome victory. That language from Congresswoman Virginia Foxx of North Carolina, who heads the House Education and Workforce Committee. You also have Speaker Kevin McCarthy out today saying that this will make the college admissions process fair and uphold equality under the law. So right now, at least on Capitol Hill, reaction is really split along party lines.
And Nicole, I want to continue that thread with Bob. Bob, I know that on America Decides tonight, you're going to speak with House Minority Whip Catherine Clark. And as Nicole just spelled out there, which is the same as what Congressman Horsford just said to us, there is now this criticism that the court is not legitimate, and President Biden at the very least said it's not normal. How are House Democrats using this sense of legitimacy of the court to their political benefit? I wonder, with the striking down of Roe versus Wade, the striking down of affirmative action, if this adds to the political calculation for 2024, for example.
Representative Clark, who will be on America Decides tonight, has issued a statement that's in line, as Nicole said, with many congressional Democrats expressing outrage about the decision in framing the Supreme Court as a court that's extremist in their view and deeply conservative. But President Biden's response to the question from a reporter today about whether this was a, quote, rogue court, and he responded by saying it's not a normal court, is a real prism into the Democratic Party debate about how to, on the rhetoric issue, handle this matter. Should they call it a rogue court, an extreme court, or just not a normal court? Because they're trying to balance inside the Democratic Party their outrage with their institutional belief in the Supreme Court as a place that, should it ever move in a more progressive direction, a liberal direction with justices in the coming years, could still be seen as a credible institution. Though there are those also in the Democratic Party who are saying that the way the court is now formed is not sustainable for American democracy, and they have long argued on the more left side of the Democratic Party to expand the Supreme Court, and you can certainly expect those calls to increase in the coming days.
Nicole, last time the Supreme Court overturned a major policy decision that had been something of a standard bearer in our country, Roe versus Wade, we saw how Democrats immediately mobilized and used that as a campaign issue. Are we starting to see the same thing among Democrats on Capitol Hill now?
Well, I think it's a little too early to tell, but I certainly think this could be yet another issue for Democrats, as Bob alluded to, in 2024, particularly when you're looking at talking to voters of color who already feel somewhat discouraged by the fact that, they have not seen as much progress when it comes to issues like voting rights, and now this issue of reproductive rights, and of course, this issue of affirmative action. So I think it just adds another argument to their case. But I think the broader question, when we look at kind of what happens next politically, I think there are two prongs. As I mentioned, certainly on the progressive Democratic side, there may be these calls for expanding the court. But I also think on the Republican side, one area to watch, we have already seen congressional Republicans really, use a lot of their messaging around these culture wars, whether it's critical race theory or this issue of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for instance, you have Indiana Congressman Jim Banks saying, well, if it's now illegal to use affirmative action in colleges, why should it be allowed in the federal government? And we have seen in various congressional hearings, some congressional Republicans really pick apart some of this emphasis around diversity. So I do think that that is also an issue you could see on the Hill going forward. I also think, more broadly speaking, when it comes to universities, of course, and now many of them will be trying to figure out what will be a race-neutral policy going forward, which we have seen some colleges and universities universities employ even prior to this decision, and whether or not those could be challenged going forward. So I think those are some spaces to watch.
Yeah, really important components to all of this. Robert Costa, Nicole Killian, thank you both very much joining us from our Washington Bureau. And folks, remember, you can watch America Decides at 5 p.m. Eastern right here on CBS News.
Well, still to come on CBS News, are they ready to walk the picket line? Some Hollywood stars are urging their union to stand firm in their negotiations with the studios. We're going to be taking a look at the biggest sticking points.
And new legal trouble for the woman who wrote a book about coping with her husband's death, but was then charged with killing him. You're streaming CBS News.